So welcome to the Royal Oak Local Transit Task Force meeting of March 20th, correct? Yes. So we'll call this meeting to order and we'll make introductions. I'm Marie Donegan. I'm the chair of this meeting.
Eileen Orlansky.
I'm Brian Cook.
Dave Woodward sits here. He'll be 10 minutes late, he said, so we'll skip him.
Paul Curtis.
Becky Krieger.
And Commissioner Shar Douglas is in beautiful Florida.
Oh.
She was sending lovely pictures of herself on the beach eating seafood, so we'll just pretend we don't know her. And we'll welcome her back for the next meeting. So tonight we're going to, well, let me just read the agenda. Introductions, the agenda, we're going to review and discuss the draft of local transit options or strategies that will be presented to us from SMART. We're going to plan our next meeting because we still have plenty of business to do. Then we'll have public comment and then we will adjourn. So could I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
And everybody approve the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. There are no minutes yet, so we'll get that in our next meeting. So at the last meeting, we reviewed the local survey, the survey that we did. We went into depth in that. And so just to review it, and it's online. It's on Facebook, it's on it's on our city's website. There's a page on the Royal Oak website dedicated to this task force, so that's where you can find the survey. There's a summary and then the complete thing. Generally speaking, this is just the paragraph that 66, we had 1,200 responses, which was really great from the city of Royal Oak, from people across the spectrum, across the city, representing all age groups. And 66% of them, generally speaking, said they would use transit if it was frequent, connected to the region, and covered the entire city. They wanted to go to downtown Royal Oak, to events like Arts, Beats, and Eats, to the Farmers Market, and to the Detroit Zoo. Those were the top 4 destinations. Not surprisingly, most Royal Oak residents don't use transit currently, but are willing to learn. The parents who responded to the survey said that they were willing to put their high school and middle school kids on a public transit bus if it was convenient and safe. And the citizens of Royal Oak said it was very important to improve transit service for seniors around the city of Royal Oak. But also keep in mind what we heard from the Boys and Girls Club. They're eager to get a lot of their members to the club after school and then home after that. We also heard from Beaumont Health, the Beaumont Hospital, that has a lot of folks, not only who work at Beaumont, who take public transportation or expensive cabs or expensive Uber rides, but also a lot of people who need to go there. And remember that healthcare these days is not from 9:30 to 3:30. It's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year. You can get MRIs at midnight if you want to. So all of those needs that people identified. So based on a lot of what we heard and what SMART, our partner in transit, heard from us, Lucas put together, and his great staff, put together some strategies. And there were 6 of them, including the original one that some people have seen that we called WROK back in the day. He's analyzed that as well. So there's 6 strategies. These are not, and it's important that we know that these are not 6 plans to choose from, but they all contain elements of a transit strategy that can be incorporated into a plan, either as a whole or in parts, or none of the above, but we want to look at them to see how they respond to the stated priorities of the community. And so as I was talking to Dave Woodward today, and we assumed that if we invited 100 transit planners to take a look at Royal Oak, we probably would come up with 100 different plans in 100 different ways, and we'd probably do this till the end of time. But we just want to try to narrow it down as much as possible, because we know that some things will work and some make sense and some certainly won't work. Some are too expensive. Some just aren't even worth it to do. So tonight, by the time tonight ends, I hope we can establish a framework, at least, a framework strategy that we can work on, or that Lucas can work on, to come to, to take them back and make some adjustments to a plan or two that we like, that he can present at the next meeting. So what Lucas is gonna do tonight is take us through this presentation. I assume it'll be up on those screens. Take them through one by one. They also include cost estimates, so we can talk about that a little bit. Oh, look, there it is. And, whoops, and then I'd like to just, if it's okay with Lucas, to ask questions as we go along, because if we don't, we forget them by the time we get to the end, and I want people to be able to keep up as we go along too. And then after we're done with the presentations and we can discuss them a little bit, I'd like everybody at the table to state their priorities. What have they heard from the last, 5 meetings? Your priorities for what you're looking at as you analyze these. Do any of them look great? Do any of them look like something we would never do? Can you pick 2? Can you pick 1? Can you eliminate them all? Just see if we can narrow it down a little bit so we can have a more detailed discussion. And then after we do all of that and we leave here tonight, then we have to start discussing funding. How do we fund any or all of this? And we'll do that at a public meeting in the next week or so. And then somehow combine all of that with what we come up with as a strategy for you. So with that, I will just let Lucas take it away. This is Lucas Reistad. Go ahead.
Thanks, Marie.
Yeah.
My
He's the
name's-
mobility, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I can do that.
He's the mobility management coordinator for the smart bus system.
Yes. Thanks, Marie.
Thank you.
So as Marie summarized pretty well, I've been one of the people at SMART helping the task force work through some important transit-related questions. And tonight I've got 6 of these sort of conceptual transit service designs that are different flavors of what transit could look like in Royal Oak to talk about. So let's get to it. A little bit of overview first, just a reminder of what transit service already exists in Royal Oak that SMART operates. So if you look at this map here, you kind of see on Woodward Avenue, there's a lot of thicker lines. That's where SMART has most of its frequent regional service, including the Red Line, which is our new fast service. That's a limited stop, frequent 7-day-a-week service that we operate up and down Woodward Avenue between Detroit and then Troy and Pontiac. And then there's some crosstown service, some thinner lines on 14-mile and 11-mile roads. There's not a lot of frequent service there, and then a little bit of service up and down Main Street. Again, not frequent service. Most of the service that SMART operates around Royal Oak is sort of on the edge of the city. So I think Marie alluded to this a little bit, but what you're about to see, these are not final plans for what transit should look like in Royal Oak. They're just kind of different examples of how it could work here. The idea was to get the task force members to kind of talk about the different trade-offs that exist between different types of service designs and understand just what they would look like in real life, kind of. There's still plenty of room for adjustments, changes. You can mix and match parts of them or throw them all out and start over again, Plenty of opportunity for additional public feedback as we go through this process. This is really just a starting point. Again, just to reiterate some of the priorities that we learned from the survey, frequent service was one of the most important factors, as would connecting to the rest of Metro Detroit, covering the entire city with service, and serving key Royal Oak destinations that you see listed there. So, a little overview of what the transit service concepts are. There are 6 concepts. 3 of them use sort of a regular fixed route bus design. So if you see a smart bus on the road today, that's what a fixed route bus is. It follows a dedicated route. It serves existing stops that you see on the side of the road, and it follows a set schedule. 2 of the concepts are what would be called sort of a flexible bus route service. So it mixes some elements of a regular fixed route bus with more demand response on-demand elements. And then there's one option in here that's all on demand. It's just sort of a zone service. The bus would pick up and drop off people at their houses and their destinations. There wouldn't be any routes or schedules or anything like that. In addition to those 6 concepts, we've sort of floated the idea of improving service on SMART's Route 430 service that runs up Main Street from the Royal Oak Transit Center into Troy. That's sort of separate from all of the other concepts. It's not included in any of the cost estimates for the concepts. It's kind of a floating idea that you can add or subtract from any of the concepts as you might see fit. Each of the concepts contains an estimated operating cost and a little bit of a contingency in there for sort of unknown factors. But it's important to note that the cost estimates you'll see at the end of the presentation do not include the cost of purchasing any vehicles or any startup capital costs that you might need or any sort of larger administrative costs. It's just to compare how much it would cost to operate the service on the road every day. Those kinds of things will kind of come into play as we settle on a final model and move into a more detailed analysis of what that could look like. So an overview of what the levels of service would be for each of these concepts. It's kind of the same across all of them. On weekdays, the service would be available between 6 a.m. and 12 a.m., Saturdays between 7 a.m. and 11 p.m., and on Sundays between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. So it's a pretty good swath of the day where you could get pretty frequent transit service in Royal Oak under each of these concepts. And the frequencies range from 15 to 30 minutes, 15 minutes during the peak periods of the weekday hours, and then 30 minutes pretty much the rest of the day and on the weekends. So nice, consistent frequencies, pretty frequent service, good place to start. And
So
then,
let me just,
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
if you wanted to increase any of that to, say, go to midnight or 1 a.m., that's just a matter of adding, it just costs more.
yeah, it would
Yeah.
just cost a little bit more. Adding hours to the span of service usually isn't super expensive. If you want to change the frequency for a certain number of hours of the day, that might be a little more expensive, but you can do both. Service levels for the 430 service would also be similar if you chose to enhance that. The frequencies are a little bit less because that would serve as a regional connection route that would still go all the way up to Troy. But it would kind of provide a nice regional connection backbone down Main Street that's kind of missing right now from the existing network of smart routes that you saw on the map before. The only thing that's a little different is the last service concept. That doesn't really have a schedule to it because it's all on demand, so these things don't really apply to that one. A little bit of an overview of what the enhanced Route 430 could look like. So right now, the service runs, again, from the Royal Oak Transit Center up into Troy. It only operates on weekdays. There's no midday service or evening service, and the frequencies range from about 30 to 45 minutes. And that's because there's only 2 buses operating on that route at any given time. And so when traffic gets kind of bad, you have to stretch the frequencies a little bit since there's not another bus being added in. Some things you could do to improve that service. You could add service on Saturdays and Sundays. You could fill in service on weekday afternoons and evenings. And if you add a 3rd bus to the route, that would allow you to achieve pretty consistent 30-minute frequencies all day long.
And I think we had talked also about extending it past downtown Royal Oak and going all the way to Woodward.
Yes, one of the extensions could take it all the way down to the zoo, which would be nice. And once you've added that 3rd bus in, it's also possible to extend it a little bit farther to the north too, which is nice.
Brian?
So you could run the 430 then and have a transit point at 11 at Woodward to catch fast if you wanted to go to downtown Detroit.
Correct, yeah, near
At
the
11 or at 10?
near the zoo, yeah, so near 10 Mile,
Right.
yeah, we've got a stop there
Lifetime
too.
Fitness or any
Right, right,
across. Yeah, I
Okay,
think,
yeah, 10.
you're putting a new bus shelter, I think, across at the zoo,
Correct,
right? And then
yeah,
they're making improvements, somebody's making improvements to the pedestrian crossing.
yep,
I
there are
think
gonna
the
be some
zoo is, or
improvements
MDOT
there.
is, yeah.
And also, we're looking at sort of opening up that little gated area underneath the parking ramp at the zoo.
Oh,
To look at
sure.
a little park and ride lot for the stop too.
Oh.
That's still in the works,
A
but we're
strange
hoping to do
place.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, something else at that location.
Does the 430 operate as it does today because there's not the demand or not the money to operate it as like would be a useful service? I mean, right now it's not all that useful. So
Right.
why is it not all that useful right now?
So it's a little bit of both. There's not much money to expand the service
Yeah.
right now. But if this is part of a larger system in Royal Oak, that could generate some demand for people going up to Troy. Providing better connections into that line, because right now that's the only bus route really up and down the center of the city. But if it's part of a more cohesive network, that could also drive more demand. But the main reason is that there's just not a lot of money available at SMART to expand services like that.
All right. And then you do have one fast bus, so the frequency will be every half hour that goes to Somerset. Because I'm trying to think,
Yeah.
if you go up Main Street, or you can go Woodward over to Somerset, but that's where they meet. Okay.
Yeah, so once you get to Birmingham, the fast route kind of splits. It's 15 minutes from Detroit to Birmingham, and then when it splits, it's 30 minutes beyond that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Cool.
So that's what the Route 430 could look like if you fix that up a little bit. And that's something that SMART could directly operate and then just put right out on the road as soon as the money is available for it. Now we're going to get into the concepts. So the first concept might look a little familiar. That's what I called WROK Max. That's the original system map that the task force had looked at. It consists of 8 fixed route bus lines that you can see on the map. And if you see the orange area there, the shaded area on the map, that represents kind of the half-mile walking distance from each of the bus routes. And you can see how the color gets darker in some areas. That means that the coverage areas of different routes are sort of overlapping, right? And from a certain perspective, that can be seen as being somewhat inefficient, right? If you've got 2 bus routes that are within a half-mile walking distance for someone and they kind of go to the same place, is it necessary to have both of them there? So there's some redundant coverage in this. The route network is a little confusing. And all of this together makes this option pretty costly to operate. So as an alternative,
Before you move
It does
this
cover the
from
entire
that
city, I'll
map,
say.
it does,
Yeah,
yes.
go ahead, Paul.
I noticed the existing smart fast bus is represented on Woodward on this map, but I don't think the existing 430 up Main Street is represented on this map. Is that true?
Correct,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you.
Yes, I do add that in on some of the later maps, just
Yeah.
for additional confusion, so look for that later.
Well, I think it's important to see
Yeah.
what's, yeah, thank you.
Okay. So the next option is sort of a pared down version of that. The route network is a little bit simpler. I call it WROK Min. You've got 3 lines serving the city instead of 8. You've got pretty good coverage. You can see the orange area there hits, the vast majority of the city. The structure is a lot simpler, and the cost is a lot lower too because you've got these more efficient route networks. And they kind of touch everything too. You notice that there are a lot of different ways to get to Woodward, to transfer to the fast route on Woodward. There are a few different ways to get downtown and to the zoo, up to, the grocery stores, Meijer and Kroger on the outskirts of the city. And the service also comes pretty close to the middle schools and the high schools, so that's another service option for folks to want to get to school. You'll notice there's a black dot in the middle of the city for a transfer location where all 3 of the routes come together. So if you need to get from one corner of the city to the other and you don't have a direct ride, you can kind of transfer there. And because the service is pretty frequent, you won't have to wait that long.
But one thing on this map too, though, is the orange line, for example, doesn't have to run on Main Street, right? I mean, that could go on Washington. You don't have to have a redundant service there, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Any any small changes like that can be accommodated pretty easily. Yeah.
Okay.
And again, 430 was not on that map.
Right.
Good,
Yeah.
thank you.
I only included it in the other maps when I thought the enhanced service would sort of improve the that concept design a little bit.
Okay,
So you'll see them later.
good.
I think there were some questions at a previous meeting about what some travel times on the system could look like. So I sketched out a couple just using Google Maps for some walking times and things like that. And this is based on the WROK Min option that we just saw. So to get from the southeast corner of the city up to the hospital, it would be about a 33-minute trip. That includes walking to the stop, waiting for the bus at the stop, and then the actual time traveling on the bus too. And then
That's with
from
no transfer?
no transfer, that's a direct route. And then the other option that you can see here is traveling from northeast Royal Oak to downtown. That would take about 20 minutes again, including time for walking and waiting for the bus. A couple of different things. These 2 options are some of the longest trips that you might see in the system, so the travel times reflect that. And if you have an app on your phone that allows you to track the real-time location of the bus, there's a little bit more certainty about when that bus is going to be at your stop, so maybe you don't have to get to the stop as early. You cut down on your waiting time a little bit. But these are just some examples to show what that looks like. Okay. The third concept here, and I'm sorry Dave isn't here, I think that was kind of his,
Oh, yeah.
favorite idea.
We can always go back to it.
Yeah, is what I called the zigzag. So you notice this blue line kind of passes back and forth, east to west across the city on the mile roads. And it's just a regular fixed route bus with regular stops. And that zigzag allows you to get total coverage of the whole city. You see the whole city just about as in orange there. But it's kind of an inefficient route pattern. It's not very direct if you want to get from north to south. That's why I added in the green line on this map, which is the enhanced Route 430 service on Main Street. Kind of gives you another transfer option if you want to get north to south instead of going all the way on the zigzag to get from point A to point B. So it might help if you were to use this model. But since the route's really long, to operate it at high frequencies is pretty expensive. And it's not very direct either.
Yeah, I think we thought it would be, but then by the time you make that circuit, that's a lot of distance to cover. I mean,
Yes.
It's a pretty small geographically, city, but when you have to travel like that, it covers a lot of distance.
Yeah.
Well, for this one, then to get, I mean, it's almost everything's going east and west except for on Campbell and up on, is that Greenfield? Yeah.
Yes.
So then to get to the 430 line, you'd have to get off the blue route and transfer to the 430,
Correct.
right?
Yep.
Okay.
Excuse me, between the mile roads, I mean, that's a long walk to get to the bus too, if I'm seeing this correctly.
It'd be about a 10-minute walk, half mile.
Half mile?
Yeah, yeah. From either, if you're starting in the middle, it'd be about a half mile either way. Yep.
Hey, Lucas, will you get to your rankings later in different slides? Okay, I'll hold on to that.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that table's at the very end.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yes.
We may have to go back and forth.
Okay. So concept 4 is the first of 2 flexible bus routes. This kind of marries some of the elements of a regular bus route with this new on-demand idea, right? Where the bus sort of starts out on either end of the route at a scheduled stop and a time point, right? So the bus leaves the beginning of the route at, 8 o'clock a.m. And then it gets to the end of the route at 9 o'clock a.m., let's say. And so you can kind of judge when a bus is going to be coming based on that. But the bus will leave the main roads there to come into neighborhoods and pick people up and drop them off at their house if they request that. And then it'll return to the main road again. And this service will pass by one of these blue dots that you might not be able to see too well on the map. They're spaced about a mile apart at major intersections. And there, you can just walk to that location. And if you know a bus is coming, if you've got your phone out and it says there's a bus 5 minutes away, and you've walked to that stop, the bus will come by and pick you up without having to request anything. It's not a scheduled stop, but the bus always comes by there, so you're able to get on it if you're there at the right time. And then, the bus just keeps going on whatever route is required to pick up all the other people who have made requests for that trip. This option would reduce the amount of walking time that you'd have to do, because you can request a pickup or a drop-off right at your location. But it's kind of expensive to maintain the frequencies on this route because you have to factor in so much time, extra travel time for those detours into the neighborhoods to pick people up and drop people off. So it's kind of a trade-off there. If you want to maintain the frequency and also maximize the convenience for people who don't want to walk that far, it gets kind of expensive. But you could do it this way if you so choose.
So the northern blue route stays in the north and the southern blue route stays in the south.
Yes, yeah, the colored zones on this map.
Right.
And they overlap kind of between, between 12 mile and 13 mile, the zones overlap. Those are the zones that each one of those routes will kind of detour within in order to pick people up and drop people off.
So with this one, if you live in the northern section of the city, to get to downtown Royal Oak, you'd really have to be along the 430. Because for Woodward, there isn't that. I guess you went Woodward to the zoo and then you went north. But okay.
Yeah,
Well,
there would be
or-
some transfers, yeah.
Yeah.
Or you'd take 13 mile to the 430, I mean, you could get off, you could get on the,
Seems like
well,
you
you'd
have
be in
to
that loop and you
drive.
just get to the 430 bus, right?
Mm-hmm. 4:30 or fast down to
Yeah.
the zoo.
By the way, for the audience, there's a narrative that belongs to all of this that's also on the website that explains all of these in pretty good detail. So that's what I'm
Is-
looking at. So go ahead.
Is there, like, something that explains how long people typically, like, would be willing to walk to get to a bus stop?
Standard's usually like quarter mile to a half mile. You know, anything longer than that is probably too long for most people to walk.
So
Yeah.
quarter to a half mile.
Yeah. So
Thank
we're
you.
in there. This half mile area that you've seen is kind of one of the standards that's used.
And of course, with this route, with the two flexible routes, it can come to your door too.
That's right.
I like that.
Yeah, like on the trip home from the grocery store when I have my
Yeah,
arms
sure.
full of things. But but for instance, on this fact that they stay in their zone, south and north in this case, if I lived in the southeast corner and wanted to get to the Beaumont Hospital, I'm definitely gonna, it looks like 2 transfers unless I can get myself to the fast bus and then I gotta walk from Woodward, right? So, right, if
Yeah.
I lived in the southeast corner, I'd catch a blue to get to the green, to get to the next blue, to get to the hospital, kind of thing.
Yeah, some of those trips get a little bit more difficult at that point.
Okay.
Going back to the quarter mile, is the quarter mile walk like a smart metric, or is that a universal, like if you're in X city somewhere, the stops are about a quarter mile, half mile apart, and people expect to walk that far?
It's a pretty standard metric across other systems too, yeah.
Okay, so people do that in other cities, it's not, okay.
Yeah, and especially one of the biggest factors is too, if you look at a stop and then draw like a quarter mile circle around it, you have to think about what the street grid network is around that stop, right? If you've got a pretty good grid of north-south streets and east-west streets that intersect at regular intervals and sidewalks and everything, it's a really easy walk to do. But if you're out farther in the suburbs than, say, Royal Oak, the street grid isn't as direct, there might be sidewalk gaps, that walk might be a lot more difficult. So here,
Okay.
it'd be relatively easy.
And sure, I've had this conversation with people in Rochester Hills, some parts of Troy, and so the quarter mile distance in a subdivision with no sidewalks, obviously, with a winding road, and some of them are dead-end streets, far different than, say, Royal Oak quarter mile.
Correct.
So we're lucky in that respect that we are connected in that way with the grid.
Yep, makes my job a little easier anyway.
So as a point of reference, like a quarter mile is roughly 11 mile to Fourth, slightly further than that. Just,
I'm sorry, what'd you
I was
say?
saying a quarter mile is roughly 11 mile to slightly south of Fourth, maybe to like Fifth Street. That would be, if you went a linear quarter mile in downtown Royal Oak, that's the distance there. I was just curious what a quarter mile actually
Yeah.
looked like, so that 11 mile to, it is, but if you want to frame it in terms of, you're thinking about 2 points, B-dubs to 11 mile, that's roughly a quarter mile.
Okay.
Join discussion or join,
That'd be far in the snow.
oh, you got it.
So, concept 5 kind of modifies the first flex route proposal that you saw a little bit. One important aspect is that the southern route now connects all the way up to Beaumont Hospital. So you could make a transfer between those two services there, and people who live in the southern part of the city can go directly to the hospital at least without having to make a transfer. There are some other aspects of this service that are a little different too. It's a little bit less expensive to operate this because there are some changes to the way the service operates during the peak periods of the day. Instead of having, say, a bus go in both directions on the route at 15-minute frequencies during the peak periods, right? This model kind of breaks the route up into 2 different layers. One layer is where the vehicles all travel to Woodward, right, in the mornings to get Royal Oak commuters out of the city to Woodward, to Beaumont, to wherever they're going. And those buses operate every 15 minutes. And then in the evenings, the buses kind of take them back into the city from Woodward in that direction at 15-minute frequencies. But then in the opposite directions, those times of day, the bus just runs every 30 minutes. The first concept, like I said, the buses ran 15 minutes in both directions. This kind of changes things a little bit to emphasize the commuter traffic patterns. And that lets you take one bus out of service, right, on each of these routes during the peak periods of the day, and that's where you save a little bit of money. But you kind of sacrifice some of the frequencies going in the non-peak travel direction at those times of day. It's still 30 minutes, but it's not 15. Yeah.
This one gets silence from everybody. Got a lot of lines on it.
Yeah, the little blue lines kind of are supposed to indicate those buses that operate in the peak periods and only in one direction, right? So,
Yeah, I think on all of these, it's hard, I don't think we can go back, but on all of them.
which one do you want to go back to?
No, I'm just thinking in general, just Crooks Road, up where Eileen lives, up in the.
Yeah,
part that
I'm
goes-
just
Yeah, right.
looking at that.
It goes north, past the apartments and up to Coventry Club and all of that. That's gonna be something we're gonna wanna be talking about, so
This is-
just
there's
bringing that up.
nothing
Doesn't go by
actually-
your house, yeah.
I know. It's not-
Coventry Club, a lot of people live there, very populated, so, okay, carry on.
So just for reference, is this kind of like on,
Meyer,
okay,
up by Crooks and where Meyer Road comes in.
okay, yeah.
So it's, yeah, it kind of crosses through there where all that white space is.
Yeah, there's a lot of apartments there, so,
Tons. Yep.
okay.
Okay. Then the last one is just a strict zone service, right? So you kind of split the city up into 3 colored zones there, and then you put some buses in those zones to pick people up and drop people off on demand whenever they want a trip, wherever they want to be picked up or dropped off. There's no schedules, there's no stops, there's no flexible routes or anything like that. It's just on-demand service. Doesn't cost as much, but you don't have as many vehicles operating at any given time, so your capacity is a little bit lower, and frequency is really, you might have to wait a little while longer for a trip if all the vehicles are tied up or something like that. So this one, again, it maximizes frequency and it delivers total coverage because you can get picked up and dropped off anywhere. But it would also make timed transfers with some of Smart's service on Woodward a little bit more difficult too. Kind of gives you the most flexibility, but you kind of sacrifice on a lot of the other elements there.
How did you estimate service hours? Because I'm looking at that narrative that isn't on your chart there, and I noticed it had a lower estimate of service hours. I was just curious how you made that
Sure.
estimate on this route.
So-
this, zone service.
You kind of start out by guessing how many vehicles you'll need assigned to a zone at different times of day, right? So for an example, if you've got 3 buses that are tied to the northernmost zone that are just serving trips, during the peak period of the day, which covers maybe 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. in the mornings and then 4 p.m. to, 7 p.m. in the evenings. That's 6 hours a day where you've got 3 buses operating continuously, right? You're paying 3 drivers to be out there on the road, available as needed. And so that, you pretty much just multiply the number of vehicles you have in service by the number of just strict hours that they're available for, and that's your service hour number.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And then I think I understood that you could leave the zone to get dropped off, but then that bus would return directly to that zone and not pick, so if you wanted to go from the northern zone to the farmer's market, you could get there, but you couldn't catch that one necessarily back to the northern,
So here's how the round trip might look like
Yeah.
to and from the farmer's market.
Yeah.
Let's say you live in the northern zone, you request a pickup at your house and a drop off at the farmer's market.
yeah,
That vehicle assigned to the northern zone will pick you up at your house and then take you down to the farmer's market. And then it's going to go right back up to that zone to serve other trips that originate in that zone.
yeah,
If you want to come back home, you're going to request a trip from one of the vehicles in the southern zone.
right,
And then it'll take you back home and then come back to its home zone.
great.
So, yeah.
But I have to imagine technology would exist to say if someone in the southern zone at the farmer's market wanted a bus, and that bus was returned to its home zone in the north, it could match up that rider with that bus, so it's not a wasted journey, right?
It could, yeah. This is sort of an assumption that if you're operating at like maximum capacity, right, you're not going to have the time to do that.
Yeah.
So that's how this is built out, but you
Okay.
could very well do that too. Yeah. Just depends on how much demand is straining the system at that time, really.
And these are generally thought of, these vehicles, as more like the vehicles we already have, which are those cutaway buses or is that what you call them,
Yeah,
connector
the
buses?
cutaway buses, it could be like some of the smaller shuttle vans. It really just depends on what
Right.
kind of demand might exist for the service.
So if 40 people want to go to the farmer's market on Saturday morning, it could be a pretty busy, buses going everywhere all the time. And you could be waiting for a while, because if we only have whatever it says, 16 vehicles on the road, and so you could wait 15 minutes, or you could wait half an hour.
Yep.
Could even wait longer than that,
Yeah,
depending on.
it does depend. I mean, there's some additional sort of extra capacity built into this model where maybe there's a couple of floating vehicles that could cover the whole city and pitch in to, meet some additional
There-
demand.
Plus, there's the 4:30 bus
That
on
too.
Main Street.
Yes, let's not forget about the 4:30 bus on
Never
Main Street.
forget about the
Yes.
4:30 bus.
Is there a city that does this concept that is successful, that is around here?
So around here, not as much. There are places that are trying this. This is still a pretty new concept. There are different ways to do it. A lot of places will try to do something where people will reserve a trip, right, and then they'll bundle all of those people and trips together into a bus route that kind of makes sense for that trip, right? I think Uber is already doing things like that in larger cities. There was some attempt to try that here. I think Quicken Loans downtown sponsored sort of an on-demand bus service, mostly for some of their employees, and they tried it out and it didn't work that well. But that could have been a marketing issue. A lot of different ways that maybe that didn't work out. But you could try it here for sure.
Thank you.
Our existing senior network, I mean, is that similar to this, except there's no zones, it's just however many buses are operating at one time, just floating throughout the city?
More or less, yeah.
Senior network, that does go out of Royal Oak, right? Does it drop off at,
5 miles, I think.
Yeah, it will serve some destinations outside of the city, yeah, but it only serves, residents of the city.
Yeah.
Is the other thing.
And
yeah.
it's not on demand or on call, it's,
Yeah, usually I have to
Book it a
reserve a
couple
trip
days in
farther in
advance. Yeah,
advance
right.
because they get pretty booked.
Right.
Yeah.
yeah,
but you have a similar situation like the farmer's market, is if 6 people need to go to Beaumont to the doctor, and your appointment's at 9 and mine's at 10, they're gonna pick you, you're gonna be on the bus.
Mm-hmm.
They're gonna pick up 6 people and then drop them all off at Beaumont at the same time. Or you can wait so it's a capacity issue. The reason that happens for the seniors is because we don't have enough buses,
yeah.
enough drivers, so that's kind of a similar situation, except these buses would be on call with the technology.
Okay,
Okay?
thank you.
Yep. And then this is sort of the big table that compares all of them. Okay, so we have a few different aspects here that you can see. You can see the first row just tells you the number of bus routes and the number of zones that are a part of that option. And then you can see how many service hours the service would provide too for comparison, how many new vehicles you would need in your fleet. That includes sort of all of the vehicles you'd need to operate at the highest demand part of the day, plus a couple of extra spare vehicles in case some buses break down. Annual operating cost, again, just strict operating costs, nothing else in there. I kind of give a range there. And then some rankings just to make it a little bit easier to kind of group some of these together into some tiers. The cost rank, more dollar signs means more expensive, and then rankings for convenience and legibility. If you have more stars, that means you're more convenient or you're more legible. And so what those two mean, you've kind of got, for convenience, that's kind of a combination, and these are just very arbitrary, sort of my own reading of what these look like, just to help compare them a little bit more. Convenience is kind of factoring in the combination of how much walking do you have to do to get to the service, and how frequent is the service. So if you'll see sort of the best one, which is the first flexible bus option that has 4 stars. I kind of ranked it 4 stars because you have the least amount of walking and you're still maintaining a lot of that frequency, which is good. Granted, that's one of the more expensive options too. It's kind of in that middle group of costs there. And then for legibility, that's really how easy is it to understand the way the service is designed, how it works, and how you access it, right? So the regular bus routes kind of score a little bit higher on that. as do some of the flexible bus routes, because, you know, a bus route is pretty simple. You've got your schedules, you've got your stops, you've got your routes. You know, if you walk to this place and stand there, a bus is gonna come by and pick you up. But then some of the other options are, you know, especially the zigzag option, it's kind of hard to see how you're gonna get from point to point on that option. And then also with the zone service, you know, I think that's a bit of a newer concept to most people, so it might not be as easy to understand. And I guess with that, I can leave this slide up for some questions. We can bounce around a little bit, whatever you guys would like to do.
Out of curiosity, just comparing Route 430 to the zone, because, you know, they're right next to each other, it's simple.
Sure.
So if you multiply the annuals out, and I know it's not the only input, but help me learn a little bit here. So if you just multiply the annual service hours by 3, you're far less than 58,000 hours. And if you triple the cost, it just doesn't seem like it.
I see.
It
So
works there. So how does that priced exactly?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about the unit costs that went into these, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
So I used unit costs that SMART kind of uses for 2 different kinds of service, right? All of the first, 6 options there, so everything except for the Route 430 uses the unit cost, which is the cost per service hour.
Okay.
For our small bus service. So the connector service, that kind of is that on-demand, reservation-based service that picks you up at your house.
So
and
these are all
drops you off
priced
somewhere
based
else.
on the type of buses we have today for the senior.
Correct,
Okay.
yeah, the type of buses, and then also the cost of employing the drivers and maintaining the vehicles at that type of service.
Okay.
The last one, because that's an enhancement to SMART's existing fixed route bus service, is based on our operating costs for our larger buses. So the driver costs are a little bit higher for that. The maintenance costs are a little bit higher because these are bigger vehicles that have parts that are designed to last longer, things like that. So there are different unit costs for the 6 concepts versus the 430 enhancement.
But certainly for something like this, it doesn't make sense to try to get bigger buses for a lower unit cost, right? I mean,
For the SMART, for the 430 service, do you mean, or for any of the other ones?
for the other one. So you're saying the 430, it uses more efficient equipment, right?
Yeah.
But that wouldn't make sense for any of the other options because we wouldn't expect the ridership to be at the level of a frequent 430.
Right, and I
Okay.
think it's not just even the ridership question, but also how much mileage you expect to put on the vehicle, things like that.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's why the small bus costs are used for everything else.
Okay.
So what is this, so is there a way to know, like, how many drivers you would need? Like, if you need 13 vehicles for the WROK Min, like, how many drivers is that? Is that 15 drivers or 26 or?
So it's not really easy to say based on these
Depends on
cost
service
estimates.
hours, I suppose, but yeah.
I mean, the number of drivers, I guess, sort of on average per hour of service, right, is kind of built into the unit cost already, right? Because all of our operators' salaries, right, for the small bus service at SMART are already kind of built into that hourly cost. So if you say
Oh.
you need like 1.5 drivers on average per service hour or something like that, that's already kind of captured in that.
So if it's $100 a service hour, which is something we started with a while back, that's already baked in there?
Yes.
Oh, I see, okay.
Yes. And I mean, it really just depends on your staffing levels and if you've got full-time drivers or part-time drivers, things like that, that all kind of fit within the cost number, but you can't really say right now what that would be.
Dave, we haven't heard a thing from you yet. You don't have to say anything yet.
Could I ask, the 430 column on this chart that represents the enhanced, the 13,758 additional service hours?
Correct.
Do you know what the current one is in terms of, because it's outside of Royal Oak, it would be hard to say what it would be inside of Royal Oak, right?
So it's not really cut up by geography, right? 'Cause
Yeah,
it's
right.
it's a whole route, so you're right
Yeah.
about that. I have that somewhere here, let me see. I think the way
And this
I-
13,758 is the increased hours over that entire route, even beyond the
Right.
boundaries of Royal Oak.
Through Clausen, through Troy,
Yes.
all the way to
Yeah.
Somerset. And then one trip a day, I think you said, goes beyond to the Troy Transit Center, correct?
There are some trips that kind of hook down to the transit center, yeah.
Right.
I just want to point out, though, these costs are reflective of adding a third vehicle to even out the frequencies.
Yeah,
So it's not as much
Caught
the
that.
distance extension, right? Because it's, the bulk of that bus route length is pretty much the same. But if you add that third vehicle to even out the frequencies to 30 minutes all day, that gives you enough play to sort of extend the route a little bit, down to the zoo, down to Birmingham, things like that. So it's not really, if you took that one vehicle, right, that's already driving your cost to this level. You could take that one vehicle and just have it do a loop only on the City of Royal Oak part, right? But, you know, this is really kind of a regional route, right? It's
Yeah.
designed to connect all the way through.
I get
So
that.
it's kind of, that's why it
but the
goes all the way
current
through.
service hours roughly on 4:30 are, what do you guess?
Let me see here.
Thanks.
I can find that.
Because 4:30 is running all day, it only detours into run Main Street a few times, or some of the time during the day, but it's running the other times in another location. When it's not on our Main Street, it's somewhere running, right?
Well, it's on Main Street and it goes to 60 Mile, right?
Yeah, so the bus,
And then it just comes back and then it's only on Main Street and 16 Mile.
But I mean, its current service hours are limited to some in the morning and some in the afternoon.
correct. Yeah.
When it's those middle hours,
Oh, yeah, where does it go in the middle
yeah,
hours is the
it's
question.
somewhere, right?
So right now, that bus just goes and serves, you know, another, those two buses just go somewhere else. Yeah, they serve
They're
another
not
bus route.
4:30 anymore, they're some
Correct.
other route. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yep,
I never really thought about that,
yeah.
where they disappeared to, yeah.
yeah. So, I can't find the
That's
exact
fine.
service hours, but I think the rough cost estimate for operating that route as it exists today is probably between like $400,000 and $500,000 a year, just the base cost.
Okay,
So, but you're adding a lot of service, you know, 5 days a week, and then you're adding all new weekday service, you know.
Weekend, yeah.
Or weekend service,
Weekend
about
service,
100
right.
days a year. So
Right.
that's where, you know, a lot of that costs, plus the third bus. So that's why it looks like a huge increase. But you're adding a lot for it. Yeah.
Yes.
This
Becky.
might sound silly, but, two things. Do you guys ever do like a test? Like, where you would like market to an area and say, hey, for the next 2 weeks, we want to test one of these concepts, and the city goes and promotes it out there to see if this would even work before? And then second, when do you find out if it's like kind of a failure? Like say one of these got voted on by the public and we start doing it and 6 months later it is failing. Do you guys come back to the city? Like, how does that part work?
So specifically for the Route 430, I guess, if you were to put that out on the road, right? We usually like to leave new service out for at least a year before we kind of rule on it definitively, unless, you know, it's going really, really badly. But this isn't a huge change, so it'd be easy to kind of play with it for a year and see what happens. For a whole system-wide kind of service change, like you'd see, you know, if you're adding one of these service concepts, right, to serve the entire city, right? I think that's kind of a different question, because it also depends on how it's being funded and whether there are obligations there are there.
What kind of vehicles we choose, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So if we choose vehicles that's like smart vehicles, that Smart would use, that's a part of the equation as well. But we did talk with Robert Kramer, the deputy director, once about pilot programs like you're talking about. And they, you know, do you put it on the road for a year and see if anybody uses it? I mean, because it's a relatively low risk. You're not purchasing new vehicles and doing all
Right.
sorts of new things. And
Right.
so that's attractive to me in a way, as in being a good steward, I think. So that's something that we'll need to talk about when we get to the
That
sort of the
part it?
nitty-gritty and the funding and that kind of thing. It is riskier to just buy a whole new fleet of vehicles and throw them on the road and hope for the best, yeah. Which we're not gonna do. But I have read many studies, and some people, you know, they warn, the expert people, they warn not to give up after 6 months or a year. You know, a year is still even pushing it. 2 years perhaps, but that's one of the really important considerations I think we have to factor in as we move forward.
I have a question on, the survey said that, you know, many of the residents, or most of the residents, have not used a transit system. So in your experience, do you think going from not using any transit to going, having a flex route or a fixed route, which one would be the best to introduce the individual and the different, age ranges? Like, to me, it gets, you start talking about the flex rates, routes and the flexibility of, it's a lot of planning and working it out. It's kind of overwhelming, where if I know there's a bus going to be at such and such a place, and it's going to be there every 15 minutes, and I have to walk a quarter of a mile, then it's very structured, where the flex routes are not. So, in your opinion, do you think it's wise for a city like us to go to think about which way to go, to fixed or flex?
Well, I think, you pointed out, obviously, that both have some distinct advantages and disadvantages. As far as new riders who might not be familiar with transit in general, I think it really depends on who that rider is. I mean, there are two groups. One group would be like, yeah, great, something's going to pick me up at my house. I can summon it with my phone. That's something I want to use. But then other people, if you just put a bus route down the road, a few blocks from where they live and put a bus stop there, they'll just be just as happy walking to that bus stop. As long as you're doing something sort of better than where things are right now, right? Where the smart bus routes are the only service that exists, and there's not a lot of coverage, and you got to walk really far to get to them, and there's nothing connecting you to them, right? That's kind of something that creates a situation where people might not be as keen on using the service. But if you really, either the flex or conventional bus routes in the city of Royal Oak to build out a more cohesive network, I think could attract new riders.
Well, in your experience, is there any statistics on not
nothing
wanting
that-
to use the transit, and then here it is?
Yeah, I mean, not,
Give birth to child.
Clearly, I mean, education is really important, for one thing. I mean, there really is a thing, we've talked about it here, is transit training. People, I mean, they really do send people out to help people.
And I guess, I think this convenience ranking, I think it's actually really, it's telling. The convenience ranking, the legibility ranking, I think those play into it. And I think it's also like, okay, how do I actually get on? How do I pay to use this? Do I pay to use this? And I know where to get on and get off. I think it's a combination of those factors that I agree. I think that I can navigate almost anything with a smartphone. In fact, actually, if I can't navigate with a smartphone, I don't know where to go. I experienced that just in downtown, just over the weekend. I was like, where's the stop? And I needed my phone, and my battery was out. And I was left stranded until someone gave me a portable charger.
There used to be, in the old days, we'd ask somebody.
I
don't know if that ever
I did
happens
try
anymore.
asking. No one there was.
No, okay.
Right, no,
Good.
right, no. So I think it's a combination, but the transit training piece, I think all those, and the convenience, legibility factor, and in creating the space for people to move outside their comfort zone to say, like, this is something that I can actually use.
I think that limiting transfers is important too. The more straight shot you have, the simpler the route, the more you're going to want to use it. People do, when I tell people I take the fast bus and they say they want to take it, but they really are unclear about, do you pay on the bus? Do you take dollars? Do you have to have quarters? Is there a card I can buy somewhere? Will they throw me off the bus? I mean, they really, it's amazing. Like you were talking about yesterday, people's brains here are just not,
We're
they're
not,
just-
we're not transit people around here.
Wired yet.
We're not wired yet. In fact, just to add some numbers from the survey, I was just doing 97.4% of the people who responded, and a record number of people responded, so thanks people for responding. But 97.4% of the people that responded either never use public transit in the area or only occasionally. And just so you know, of the 68.3, never. 29.1.
But they want to learn.
But it turns out 70% said they would if they had the option, which I just found astounding, that the people are like interested in doing it if they could. but we can't because we don't have much service. And the service that's there is not terribly convenient because there's not connectors and it's not as frequent and it's not going where I want to go and all those things. So I'm really encouraged to think it's worth exploring here, these different scenarios, because, they never use it, but what if that's an amazing statistic to me, because
Yeah.
people who don't use it probably are used to not using it.
It's kind of one of the best examples of if you build it, they would come that I think I've ever seen. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the whole idea, when you think about it, the whole idea of me getting from here to, say, Farmington Hills is a different question to figure out than me getting from 13 in Maine to the farmer's market. I mean, that's, it doesn't hurt my brain quite as much to try and figure that out. So it just is a smaller city, so that's helpful. And we are familiar with the city. It's like when you were downtown and you find out you have to get on the bus at Randolph and somewhere.
Well, I
You're
made the
not
mistake
really
on getting on the people
sure.
mover, and that disoriented me.
Well, that's a problem. Yeah. Brian?
Out of curiosity, going back to the zone real quickly, what degree of confidence, and it could be none, and it could be just someone out there, do you have the 16 buses being used to service? And the reason I ask is I was looking up some other networks, and one large metropolitan area has a system they're implementing now, and they're using like 10 vans. And just looking at their cost structure, it seemed pretty decent. So I was curious, like, why 16? Do we have any idea of what that frequency is? I mean, could you do it with less? If you could just walk me through that a little bit.
So that's just really the starting point, what I built out in
Okay.
this concept. It seemed kind of reasonable, and the important thing too is that you, instead of having a bunch of vehicles that just go anywhere in the city, you can kind of split the city up into zones, and that helps you to achieve more reliable service in different parts of the city instead of saying, well, right now all the vehicles are tied up in the southern end of the city, and people who are up in the northern end have to wait much longer now to get a vehicle. So splitting it up into smaller, more manageable areas is one way to kind of help, improve the reliability and I guess kind of frequency.
Okay.
Though it's not really built to honor a certain frequency. That will at least help you to reduce the wait times as much as possible.
Do you have any estimate there on what the wait time would be if you were to summon one? No?
No, unfortunately, no. It really depends on how many people are trying to use the vehicles at that time and where they're coming from and going to. It's a lot harder to gauge that with this system.
And just one really rudimentary question, just to get service hours right, because I'm going back to the senior here, because that's what we have, that's what we know the cost for that and everything. So if we operate that, it's 6 hours and 15 minutes a day. We'll say 6 hours, 5 days a week, 52 weeks a year. That's the straight line calculation for service hours.
Yeah, I think to start with, though, you need to know the number of vehicles.
Okay. So,
yeah.
I think in this case we use 3, right? So
Yeah.
the seniors right now have 4,680 hours, 4,680 hour service hours, and the zone completely, blows that up significantly in a good way, and not in a poor way, not destroys it. Okay, I just, and that's, we'll get to this point, but that's one of the things I'm looking at is it seems like a lot of people love the senior network, but it just seems so inefficient. Like they don't they don't put rides together. They don't have even an Excel spreadsheet to look at who's using it. It just seems like if you could make that more efficient and expand it, it's a pretty decent thing to look at. Okay, so
Well,
anyway.
Yeah,
question,
sure,
question.
and keep in mind too that we do have we do lease 6 vehicles that currently don't operate in nights and weekends, so they're
Yeah.
sitting at your service center on the nights and weekends because we don't have the money or the personnel to put them on the road.
And certainly, even though I focus on the zone here, it's certainly not like, you need to learn a lot more about this. But when we operate a zone now, it just seems like we could operate it much better. And that's why I'm intrigued by that one, that's
Yeah,
all.
the zone now is the entire city.
And outside the
Straight,
city.
yeah, well, that's true, 5 miles outside the city. So,
Okay, thank you.
One other question. I mean, when we're looking at just across the board at annual operating costs, is this include the full acquisition cost of the vehicles that are required based on the estimates that are captured here?
No, it doesn't include any acquisition costs because it really depends
Just
if you
the
guys are
ma-
going to
it
buy
includes the
yourself or
maintenance costs.
maintenance costs are included,
maintenance
yeah,
costs, not-
but purchase not included, or lease or whatever. Yeah.
So, it would be great if we could, I don't think technology will allow us to put all of those on the screen, you know, like a slideshow?
I think we might defeat
I don't know,
technology.
unless somebody from IT comes running up from somewhere.
With a cape on.
But yeah, with the cape on, but it'd be great to see them side by side. I know we can't do that from up here. So, reactions, anybody?
Well, could I offer one feedback, just because I know you are faithfully sitting there doing all this work, and much of it is guesswork on your part, because, you know, you've seen our
Educated
survey.
guesswork.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, in terms of what we would want, right? So let me put a thought out there.
Sure.
I just look at trying to get kids to school in the morning, and families trying to hurry up and get them out the door and in the bus and get off. So drop off close to schools, a little closer to schools, I think would be a great thing for families trying to make that happen in the mornings. And then also, I noticed it doesn't really bend up to the senior community center. Do you know on Murray, where where that location
That's
is?
something that I think some of you guys actually pointed out to me
Okay.
at a previous conversation, so yeah.
And, maybe that means bending something during school run hours. A route gets a little closer to drop off at that time of the day or something like that. So those are two immediate things as I looked at those maps that might be.
Plus, we have a new park going in.
Oh, that's right,
new
Normandy
in
Park.
Normandy
Yeah,
Oaks,
using the Normandy Road
Splash
route.
pad, everybody's gonna wanna use it.
Yeah, I got my swim trunks
4-year-old
ready
is
to
so
go.
pumped.
Where's your hand, you splash pad people? I have a lot of them up here, I think. So, yeah, I mean, these roads, these are not all, chiseled in
Just-
concrete, obviously.
No, just
but,
ideas that
yeah.
might be useful if we can bend your time to do a little
Yeah,
more.
I mean, as Lucas pointed out to us before, we know the city better than he
Right.
does, so, so all of that would be important to us. And when these are gonna be presented at some point, some way to the public at an open house kind of thing, so we can all have a reaction to them.
Yeah.
Not all six, I wouldn't guess, which is a good segue to where we are. So, I don't know, there's two things that I think I want to know from everybody, or that we should share, is based on what you know and from the surveys, when you look at these plans, what are your priorities? What are you trying to address in your head? And then, are there any of these plans, these schemes, these strategies that you can say, that's not going to work, let's not waste our time on that, but this one looks more interesting, can we get more information? So who wants to start first? Paul?
Yeah, I'd
Paul
be
and
happy
you.
to jump in. Thank you. I'm looking at the same chart that's on the screen right here and thinking the Rogo Max is a little old school for me and very costly and feels like an overkill for, just my first take on that is, gee, if I were to eliminate one right now, that'd be the one I wouldn't think we need to go that direction. It doesn't have flexibility to speak of in terms of these flex routes. The other one I might throw in there is the zigzag, because I just think it's not in the whole eliminate category. I don't think it's terribly efficient, and it's pretty high cost. The frequency issues and so forth, that one doesn't attract me. So those two are probably my least favorite if we're trying to whittle them down a little bit.
We can't go, can you go back to the zigzag? We can't,
Oh,
we
sure.
can't,
Yeah.
at least I can't. That one, there it is, zigzag.
Frequency is an issue there, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Dave, Brian, Eileen? Jump in?
Either way.
Becky?
I mean,
The one that I thought, at the beginning seemed the best was I wrote it as concept too, I think that's Rogo Min. That one seemed like a good starting point. But I think we could maybe, like you said, work it so that it makes sense for the seniors a little bit more,
Yeah.
the school, stuff like that. But that one seemed, in my mind, like a pretty good starting point to try to introduce transit.
Yes. I agree.
Yeah, we need a little help out northern end, I think, on this Rogo Min.
I'm sorry, what?
No, I was saying the Rogo Min I would agree, however, it needs, like you said, it's not written in stone, so
Right, sure.
it would have to be modified somewhat as far as out in the northern end to get
Right.
into the city.
Yep.
And it doesn't, and it comes to like this, but the way it's drawn here, unless you add in a flex route, it goes to 13 in Crooks, which to me is close to the high school. I don't know how the high school people are gonna think about that, but, it also doesn't go near the senior center. That's an issue as well. Aside from that, it's a pretty good plan, at least in my mind, for now.
And again, this map doesn't represent a potentially enhanced 430 route. So
Right.
you could still have a very main artery going north and south on that
And
map.
I will have to, and the reason that it's not on here, I called Lucas about that today or yesterday, whenever that was, is the reason the 430 is not on here. The 430 will still exist, it's just not the enhanced 430 bus.
Right.
But the reason that the enhanced 430 bus isn't here is because of the purple line that goes on Rochester. Clear, is that right, Lucas?
Yes, yeah.
So it seemed too close together.
Overkill, okay.
So you could have the enhanced 430 line and not the purple line. If you wanted to do that. I'm a big fan of the 430.
I couldn't tell.
And the reason I like it is because it goes north and south, and it goes
Right
through
through the middle of the
Clawson, it
city.
goes through,
Yeah.
and it goes really all the way to Somerset, and then some of them go, and it hooks up to Birmingham potentially. And I like it also because it's kind of what Becky was talking about, is it's an enhanced something we already have, as opposed to something brand new. And I think that's, to me, seems important.
Yeah, I think the concept too, if that was kind of our starting point, and then we went around with a highlighter and we said, this is how the points, I think this is the best one by far for us to look at.
The concept too. Is that-
Yep, the ROGO.
Does that one have, a flex where you can call to?
No.
That one doesn't have that at all.
Doesn't mean it doesn't mean that it
We couldn't
couldn't,
add it,
that you
right.
couldn't, make the orange line that goes to 13 in Crooks in the morning and in the evening, go up to the high school. I mean, you could do that.
Yeah, a little more selectively than the other options that
Yes.
do it so much.
It all
but-
costs money, of
Yeah,
course, yeah.
yeah.
And it also means, just as we say something, we do this, So they're not drawings, an actual thing. And, a year from now, these, transit's fluid, as we've discussed, right? And so things change, routes change, you're changing routes all the time. Of course, you have public hearings and all of those things you do, but you never do carve them in stone. They respond to changing land use patterns and demographics and all that, so. Dave, you want to weigh in? You have to weigh in on
Yes,
something.
yeah, no, and I agree. I mean, I think, I'm kind of like, I agree with the comments made. I think from a fixed route, structure, ROGO too, I agree with, Eileen, I'd like to figure out a way to snake up more on the Crooks lane that versus where it kind of like goes currently, largely because maybe I think actually reaches like a higher concentration of people. But to see if there's a way to, accommodate the reach there, almost like kind of move that quarter-mile radius over more, so it lines more with where the concentration of folks are. And the conversation around the 430 versus the purple line, I think that's, an interesting concept to kind of figure out if we can flesh those out. The other thing, if we go back to like, kind of just like all the columns. So I am perplexed by the zone concept. In large part, because one of the key takeaways, two things, is that strong support for enhancing senior service. We're at capacity with what we currently have. And to figure out how to better meet that need, it's almost with efficiencies, some of the things that Brian, outlined some efficiency. I think we could be able to meet the needs of a lot more people. And the need for senior transit is only going to grow exponentially over the coming. So I'm attracted to it, and also looking at other areas playing with this. The zone concept aligns with the ride share program that people who do use it, which I mean, again, the survey I always found it interesting that if I didn't have a car, I would use it, and very few actually use it. So it's kind of like the opposite of the other thing that Paul was laying out. That's intriguing to me.
It is.
It's, incredibly experimental. I guess, would be nervous about like, can this like take hold? But also, is it 2 zones that with a lot more cars moving around to be able to meet the demand to be able to satisfy those things? And then it's like, lastly, I think Flex 2. The concept of a flex route, like, can it work in a of a city of our size? So I guess one of the flex models that blends the best of a fixed model structure, but I do worry a little bit for people to be comfortable using it, deviating off, and how much can it deviate off without disrupting the flow and the predictability, so that I use it as a reliable way to get to Woodward and the unlocking possibility of the fast bus or frankly the 430 to get myself up to Somerset quickly. So I would say those are the 3 that I would zero in on.
Now, the zone there wasn't any routes at all. It was just like
Correct.
Right.
free for all.
Zone has this.
Zone 3. I think so. When
Call it like ride share specific.
Yeah. So I go back to where I started from, just to add on, what are you next? But my original thoughts was to get people in and around Royal Oak, to get people in, meaning from other cities, so they can get to downtown Royal Oak or to one of our events without having to drive a car. So we have less congestion downtown, so we need fewer parking spaces. So getting in needs connections to Woodward. So if you're riding from, say, Birmingham to Royal Oak, not everybody on the bus is gonna call for a zone bus. They're gonna wanna get off at, 11 Mile or something and get on another bus. So to me, the zone can't be the only, sort of public transit, because it doesn't get people in the city, it just gets people around the city. And so, to me, so there's the combination. The combination is important, but I think that there's a reason to have a fixed route connection to Woodward, at least 1 or 2, whether that's 12 Mile. Now, the beauty of 12 Mile, if we were to use 12 Mile, well, there's a beauty in all those roads, but 12 Mile collects to Berkeley. And Berkeley already says, what are you guys doing in Royal Oak? We'd love to connect to that too. 11 miles into Huntington Woods, 13 Mile clearly goes into Southfield. So I just think it's important to have at least 1 fixed route that touches Woodward, and north, south, and east and west. So that would be the 430 route, and then at 1 Mile Road. But I do like the flex idea, and I do like the zone idea, so,
All right.
yeah.
All the above.
All the above, in some way, yes. Lucas can't probably do a map like that, but Brian?
Can you go back to the cost columns again? So, where I'm really intrigued, and that's why I was going, the zone concept seems very interesting. Like, I look at Rogo Min, for example, and it seems like a pretty decent concept there, though. I guess I think about, and it's not framed great for me, I'll have to figure it out, but like, if I'm at a certain point in Royal Oak, wherever it is, how long is it going to take me to where I want to go? So if I'm on the northeast quadrant, how long does it take me to get to LCA? Or if I want to go to downtown Royal Oak? The zone, I guess I'm more used to Ubering and lifting. That's why maybe I'm drawn to that a little bit more. To Marie's point, though, I like the idea of having a fixed route that people can either get to downtown or Woodward, which I think begs another question is, ultimately, what do people want to do with it? Is it going to be a inter Royal Oak, or how is it going to how will it connect to the the fast route, let's say, to get people downtown? And I think we need to look at where do people actually want to go. If they want to stay within Royal Oak and that's a primary focus, well, that's one option. But if Woodward's going to be the main corridor and the main goal, then the design has to be a little bit different to accommodate that. So when going to the points, like, one of my main open points is, how does it plug into the existing macro network right now? And I think when you look at some of these routes, they don't connect to Woodward probably as well as we'd like if we value the priority of getting to Woodward and moving up and down that corridor. Going back to the senior network too, like, just pure back of the napkin math, and probably wrong, but why I was asking about the numbers earlier is that the zone concept here, if I, let's say 3.5 million, that's the number I use, it's more expensive than what we're paying now for the senior network based on the 2017 numbers. So that, I'd be curious about that 3.2 to 3.9 range, if that's actually correct. Given there's a lot of variables, it's a best guess here, but it seems like we're paying, and again, I could be completely wrong, but we might be paying less than that now for the existing network. So can we make that more efficient and bring down that cost? Well, if we can, then the zone network probably becomes a lot more intriguing, because I think it can check a lot more boxes, but more analysis is needed there. Paul, you had mentioned schools earlier, and I think that's like one of the big topics I hear. And what we don't know is that if the schools even have any interest in bringing back busing. If the answer is no, and we hear that, then fine. Then we know we can try to fill a need, and I think there's enough people that say, all right, this is a need we want to fill for the community. If the school district wants to bring back busing, well, it's a different conversation, and we have a different conversation up here. So I think getting some clarity to that would be important. My gut is that the school district doesn't want to bring back busing. So when people say, I want the yellow buses back, and I do too, I have a child entering school, I want that. But if the school district has no interest and they just aren't going to do it, okay, then that's a fact, and let's see what we can do to maybe help that. Maybe nothing, maybe something. Finally, here with the capital costs for the busing, like actually acquiring the busing, to be curious if SMART can help with that, if there's some external source of funding there, because that's a significant cost. And I don't know what that would be, but that's definitely a conversation we need to have before going forward there. I hope there's some avenue. And then also going back to the zone concept, and some of what I looked at, like some cities are moving away from fixed routes into zone concepts. And there's a reason they're doing that. I think the jury's still out if that's successful or not. But perhaps, Marie, to your point of some hybrid approach where you can take a zone bus to a fixed route stop, maybe it's a reduced fare, and plug them into the, to the regularly scheduled network, well, maybe that's a solution that will actually work and benefit us. But to answer your main question of what I would like, I think the zone's pretty good, but Rogo Min, I think, has some, the fixed schedule, if they run on time, well, there's some validity to that, and I think that's a pretty interesting thing to explore.
Well, do you think there's a correlation between people that use Lyft and Uber? I always say it wrong. My grandkids always correct. But if there's a correlation between that, then people that I know, similar age and similar background, have never used a Lyft, or they've never used Uber.
But they have used a senior network bus.
Not necessarily. They probably have their own car.
Well, I guess it only operates like 2 hours a day, but
Yeah.
but the point remains. I think that if people become comfortable with it, and maybe not comfortable getting into someone else's vehicle, that can be understandable. Some of the lifts I've had have been disasters, but maybe they are comfortable in getting into a smart Royal Oak branded vehicle.
That's
And
possible.
maybe there's more of a
yeah.
comfort level
That
there.
may be a comfort level, yeah.
It is important to, as we move forward, SMART has obviously been a very good partner to us.
Yes, thank you.
That we have not spent fortunes, at least we haven't, SMART may have, on consultation time, which is great.
Analysis, yeah.
But that since we're working through the community partnership program that we already have, that we can't go off the rails and buy Jetson vehicles, you know what I mean? We have to buy, I don't know, vehicles that works through the SMART program
makes
as
sense.
well, so, yeah. Just,
And that would
or we're
be-
not gonna privatize a service after asking SMART to
So they
plan a
mean,
system for it.
Smaller-
Although he's shaking his head, he
I
doesn't.
mean, there's no commitment here. You guys can do whatever
Well,
you need
I
to do.
know, but we have to, the part about funding is the very important next step, and so
Absolutely.
we probably, we don't unless we have some sort of a benefactor somewhere that's gonna write a check
Don't
for
look
$1
at me.
billion.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
right, I'm looking at Paul, but that's not gonna happen. So that's just one of the things we have to keep in mind, I think. This is the kind of vehicle that we get. And the technology, I mean, this is probably technology that we're gonna need.
Yeah.
To make these on-demand and on-call that I don't know of anybody around the region that's using, except maybe in, like you said, at Bedrock or one of those partnerships downtown. They seem to be, but this is new technology.
I think, Lucas, you mentioned that at another meeting weeks ago, was it Groesbeck or Gratiot, that there was some flex line happening, sorta, it was an experiment. Did that involve any special technology, or was that?
So the service that SMART currently operates in the Groesbeck corridor over
Yeah.
in Macomb County is a little similar in terms of how it operates, but technology-wise, there's no app or anything like that.
Okay.
It's kind of older. We're looking at what to do with it, actually. It's a huge, like, 30 square mile zone. It's not really the most practical. We're probably coming to the end of that experiment a little bit.
Okay,
but,
right.
Yeah, other places, I mean, I know some smaller shuttle services in the region, for example, in the Grosse Points, they have a little app for the little shopper shuttle where you can see
Where the bus is on the route, things like that. I think the University of Michigan is also working on sort of a campus area shuttle service that uses some of that new technology as well.
What's that Grosse Point, or one of the Grosse Points, operates a system on a trolley thing on Kirchville, what's it called, the K line?
The K line, yep. Yeah.
And what, they use some kind of technology,
They use something called Ride Hop, I
Yes,
believe.
right,
So it's just like an
exactly.
off-the-shelf app. You can program your system into it. People enter in the code for your community, and then they can track that bus, wherever it's going.
And I did see one, the city of Novi, they don't have smart service yet. But they do have senior service. And they, use, and I met with them, and they use a system called, I wrote it down somewhere, Eco Lane. And the Eco Lane is a, advanced reservation service, but they also have a new product, which is on-demand, on-call. So it's called Eco Lane, and they use it in Novi. Now, Novi's senior service is very much smaller than ours, although their city is the same population, younger population. They have 60,000 people and 36 square miles, so it's much more, it's different than what we have, which is where a lot of these flex services are used in cities or in rural areas where it doesn't make any sense to have a fixed route system, or where it's too far to walk to get to a fixed route system, and so they're filling that gap. So we don't have that issue here, and in Arlington, Texas, which is the one you were looking at, I did some looking at that too, and so my one takeaway from that is they switched from fixed route buses because people weren't riding them. But we don't have that issue here because we don't have a system that people aren't riding. I mean, we have your system, that people aren't riding to get to the farmer's market because it doesn't go to the farmer's market.
yeah.
So we don't know that people won't ride fixed route
True.
here. So those are all I think we've just written a book
A lot to consider.
on transit service in Royal Oak. Okay, so we're not doing Rogo Max, we all know that. Zigzag, I think all of us
Yeah.
have said Zigzag is out, so that leaves us with Flex 1, 2, and Rogo Min.
In some,
And the zone, yes, and of course
or some blend of all of them, yeah,
Right.
right. Yeah.
and then the awesome Route 430.
Just a reminder, Flex 2 was the one that had the timing of the buses where it favored commuters.
Oh, that was the
right?
two blues,
Yeah.
correct,
Okay.
yeah. Yep.
the cheaper of the two.
Yep.
Or
Slightly,
less
yes.
expensive of the two, yes. So, okay, then we've done that. I think that's great. Lucas, do you have any questions for us?
No, I think I've got some pretty good feedback here. I guess just sort of awaiting, the next steps from you guys would be helpful. Some of the tweaks I think would be easy to make, but, if you guys want to kick it around a little bit more and, we can come up with some more formal tweaks, that would be helpful too.
Yeah, we don't need to, we won't ask you to come up with 6 or something again, but we do want to try and think about, paring it down in some way to be presented to the public at an open house kind of situation.
Excuse me.
So, I think so then we'll need to get pretty familiar with all of them, I think, by that point. So we'll be in touch with you about that. We're also gonna want to, when we start talking amongst ourselves in some way about how do we pay for all this, that's a whole other discussion, and I think we're gonna have to sit down with Robert. We'll have to talk to Robert about that, I think, because he's that, as opposed to you. Yeah.
Fair to say.
And I've had some conversations with the state also, so we can share all that at our next meeting. I would now, we don't have James Krazan here tonight, and Judy isn't here either, but I would like, and this is to your point, Brian, is to get a more in-depth report about our senior system. We had the one that they did for the city commission
Yeah, so
some
when I
time ago.
base my
first
numbers
meeting,
on.
I think.
Yes, I'm sorry, what?
Our first meeting, right?
Yes, but that was done for the city commission a year ago.
Yep.
But I think we still don't know, not still, we just don't know how many people actually use the service because.
And
it's-
where it goes, I have no idea, because I don't see it much out the
yeah.
northern end.
And so, like, they might not be able to know.
Well, we know how many
they-
rides it does.
We know how many rides,
How many
12,000,
unique riders are
right.
using it.
Right,
So there's 12,000 rides, that's
one-way
probably
trips,
12,000 one-way trips, so it could be, 6,000 complete trips.
right. But we don't know if that's 500 people or 2,000 people. We do know that there's 10,000 people over the 60 years of age in Royal Oak that could be using it and don't. And then exactly, if we're gonna run it nights and weekends, is it just 3 times as much money? I mean, I don't think we know that either.
And basis, again, like the quick, I don't remember if you calculated the service hour, right, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Chair.
Oh, of the senior network right now?
Like 40,
Just under 4,700 hours.
47, okay, but like the service hour, because it was about $200,000 a year. and that was-
Oh, yeah, so
about 43.
$43 an hour for the senior network now, just. close
So
to
I mean,
44.
it's, about $25 difference between like with the flex estimate, so I think you're actually onto something that we might be able to find a
Yeah.
cheaper way to be able to deliver that.
And really, where do people go? Half of the people are doing medical trips, and the other half are doing social trips, meaning getting their hair done or going to the grocery store. But I'd like to find out where else they go. Do they go outside of Royal Oak?
Yeah.
What hospitals do they go to? I also, I don't know that Lucas has to look into some of the technology, but I think, that our staff can look into some of this technology that's being used around the country to make their senior buses more responsive. And there's if you're writing it down, which you are, Deanna, it's called the National, where I wrote it down, the National Center for Mobility Management. They're like the clearinghouse for senior transportation. So they have all kinds of reports and stats and pilot programs and things that are being done around the country. I think it's a very good resource, as is the Area Agency on Aging 1B. They do a lot of they find rides for seniors too, that rides that you can't get through our system. Like if you need to get to Henry Ford downtown, you can't get there on our system, so they try and find another ride. Or to McLaren, say up north, so I'm gonna ask James to do that. And, let's see, where else are we on the agenda? We've done all of that, future meeting schedule,
Before you jump there, can I just,
then to public comment.
I wanted to say thank you again for your hard work and the partnership with SMART, who's more people than just you, but thank you, Lucas. And because I thought it was extremely helpful to be able to say, okay, there could be this kind of concept or this kind of concept, and of course, that doesn't limit the blending of concepts. Putting it on paper and being able to see something, and I appreciate all that hard work, because it helps me think and see it. A couple things that come to mind, just real quick, I'd like to say out loud. One of the things that we touched on is travel times and how long does it take to get from here to
Yes.
there, and is that too long? But it occurs to me, and I want to say out loud, that people who live in a transit culture, which I will say one more time, we don't, right, in a public transit culture, learn how to use travel time. You know, I hate travel time in a car because that's white knuckle, teeth gritting time. But time on a bus or a shuttle can be used productively. In other words, I love reading books on a bus while I'm going somewhere or except, whatever it is. So I just want to say that out loud. Travel time's important, but people who live in transit cultures learn how to use that time very productively. Whereas
That's
in
true.
a car, you don't get to.
It's true.
You just stress.
I took the bus downtown last week to a meeting at SEMCOG, Dave, and on the way home, we were able to text and chat and gossip and answer our emails. So, some
Gossip
time
too,
was spent-
good.
A little bit.
On
Good
yeah,
for you.
Wi-Fi.
Gossip on Wi-Fi, that's good. I also wanted to say thank you I appreciated your articulation, Marie, of the idea of not just getting around Royal Oak, but obviously connecting, not only for me, who lives in Royal Oak, to get out of, but to bring people into Royal Oak. That is an important thing, I think, to voice one more time, to not just get around, but to get in and out, and I like the emphasis on getting people in. That was a nice point
Without
for me.
driving.
Yeah, so thanks for bringing that up.
Well, the survey says that 46.76% of the people, their second thing, imagine that Royal Oak had a local bus system, that it connects to the rest of the region, that was 46.76% of the people, so that was important to them.
Yeah, I thought
And they
about
want to
it
get to a
for,
ball game and all that, so.
yeah, I thought about me getting out.
Right.
But I didn't think about getting others in for our local businesses and restaurants and so forth.
Right, well, a lot of our service employees, backroom people who work in our restaurants and coffee shops, for one thing, would love to be able to get here without having to take an expensive Uber ride.
Yeah.
And that's important to our economy as well. And when I got it back on the city commission early in January, in the 2017, and I discovered that we were building a new parking deck, I thought, oh, a new parking deck. How many more parking spaces do we need? And so, seemed like a better idea to get people not having to park here. So, we'll just go to future meeting dates. So we want to come back, do we want to meet a week from today, or do we want to try and set that now, or should we try and set it later?
They said it now.
Okay,
I know I can't do next Tuesday.
okay.
We have a big event for Pronto.
I can't either.
Thanks for the suggestion.
The April 3rd? It'll be spring then?
Yeah.
It seems like it's working. Yeah.
Isn't it actually spring now?
What?
Technically spring today.
Sorta.
Technically it is, yeah. All
Just
right,
died.
sounds good. April 3rd?
Yeah.
Well, I'll find out if we can still use this room or not. So that'll be good. And now, public comment. Oh, I see a hand in the back. Yes, ma'am.
Did you set a time for April?
Oh, 6 o'clock? Did that work for everybody?
Yeah,
Dave?
6.
April 3rd, you said?
Thank you.
So I said it would work before. I mean, it would. It just, I was
Things happen.
predisposed.
Yes, welcome, Spragman.
Hello.
Good to see you again.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about seniors. And looking at your survey results, if you're using that for a benchmark, there was less than 20% of the respondents were seniors.
Can you move the microphone over just a little? Thank you.
Is that better? Less than 20% of the respondents were seniors, but 66% of the respondents believed it was important to improve on the existing senior service. The existing senior service is curb or door to door. So that's the flex route. So what do they mean by improve it? Maybe the hours, extending the hours, extending it on the weekends, et cetera. But you've got to provide for the people who now use it to go to the senior center or to their doctor's appointments or whatever. And I did talk to the head of the senior center, Paige, and she said the majority of people that are using it now have to have curb to curb. It's not about walking a quarter mile, half a mile, or anything. They need that. So, so that would eliminate the mini, unless you can add on flex to that, or anything that doesn't have flex. Also, anything that has a transfer in it isn't going to work for the seniors. You're not going to improve that. So, in looking at the routes, we want to include the Salter Center in addition to the senior center, because there's a lot of senior activities over there too. And Here's my other notes. I was scribbling as I was listening. The other consideration is the fact that some of these routes are going to coexist. The fixed routes are going to coexist with the new bike lanes, so I don't know how that's going to work. Because you're putting the roads on a road diet, you're putting bicycles on there, and now you're going to put transit vehicles on there where they're going to be dropping people off and on. So we might want to consider that. And the last is, I love the idea of a pilot program before we invest a lot of capital. Costs the taxpayers a lot of money. But I know you need to take it to a ballot proposal and a millage. I don't know what the term of that millage is going to be. I'm guessing more than a year. And something to cover that capital expenditure. So that's something to consider too. That's all.
Awesome, thank you.
I want to clarify one thing.
Yes.
When we were talking about that, there was always going to be, those aren't fixed, like the routes for ROGO, min, zone drop-off. So this, when I said that that was the one that was favoring, wasn't meaning
Plus-
that that's,
There'll always be seniors.
Exactly.
There'll always be door-to-door.
so I just want to clarify that,
Yeah.
that was not a final, they didn't even have the routes that we were addressing on there, or the schools.
The reason I mentioned that one is it doesn't have any flex.
Correct.
Okay.
Right, we were talking about always being able to add to different things. So I just want to clarify that for the public.
Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. You can see what the mayor sees. You can't see back there.
Thank you all for all this work and consideration. Today I was going through the bus routes, and perhaps maybe you can help me with this. I'm a bit blind, but I have a question on one of the routes. If you look at the smart system map,
Existing map?
the
The
existing,
existing smart service?
right, a lot of these are overlapping. So, but you can help me with this.
Just like that, sure.
Right by,
It is a small map.
yes, that's what I downloaded off here.
Okay, so where are you here?
We're right here on 13 Mile Road going down Crooks. Here's the 430, I think it is.
Can you,
430. But it wraps around
hello?
right here.
Can you have that, can you just have the conversation? So,
And
Yes.
then bring back your comment.
Yeah.
If you have a public comment, like, why don't we-
He's going to explain this to us because it's important to
Oh,
the
it
bus
is.
route.
I-
It's the 430. There's a dotted line that goes around down to Crooks Road. It goes, what does the dotted line mean?
So in the mornings, there's one trip that comes out that way to
Go
serve the high
around
school.
the high school.
yes.
And then there's another trip in the afternoon that does the same thing. And the same thing goes to the middle school. There's a little
Okay.
dotted line down there too.
Okay, but I went through and I took each map, and this will be new, but all these existing routes are there.
Yes.
I don't think people are very familiar with the existing routes.
No, they're not.
And I think that needs to be advertised in order for them to be able to pick one of these routes that you are looking at.
Yes. The 430 route will always exist. What we're, in the proposal, it's an enhanced 430 route, so it would come all day and nights and weekends. So, yes.
Right.
But yes, as Paul said in the survey, 90% of the people said they never use transit here, so yes, they're not aware of it.
Right, but perhaps if you look at the smart map system, you'll see how many convenient routes there are to get out to Somerset, to get to Myers, to get to Kroger's, et cetera, et cetera. So
Okay.
I just wanted to make you guys aware of it. Thank you so much for all your hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else out there? Yes, sir?
Oh, sure.
Wouldn't be a meeting without you.
Thank you. And likewise, thanks for all the hard work. It's an unbelievable amount. Just
none of them are
some
on
curious
Wickham.
questions, and I do have some more paperwork for you, by the way. The smart bus drivers, can they drive the school students? Are they authorized to do that? Do they have the S licenses or S endorsements? Excuse me.
I don't know about specific endorsements, but the service does serve school students.
Okay. Because the state law, there is a state law that
Well,
says,
I should,
just throwing it out there. Yeah, there's an S endorsement, as CDL requirement to haul passengers, or school students, just like the,
I'm no lawyer,
Yeah.
but it occurs to me that it would have to be, that endorsement must be for school bus specific drivers. You couldn't like say a 16-year-old can't take the city bus because he's a student, right? There must be that S endorsement.
I believe so, yeah,
Right.
I'm not, again,
Well,
I'm not
yeah,
not an attorney
we'll
either,
figure
but
that out.
Yeah,
I wrote it,
that's-
okay.
I've got a copy of the ordinance, but that was just a question. And the other is, do we lease any smart buses currently? Is there a lease?
we lease 6 now,
Okay, and those are used for
senior.
senior?
And connector.
Okay, the connectors. I have something I do want to hand to you. I don't want to go through it. I have no comments for that, but the other is, as we're using some of the stuff I have is for costs. If we're going to increase or add bus routes, then the highway department for the city is going to have to change some of their ice control, snow control, because and that's all going to be a cost. Traffic control, they're going to, stoplights going to have to be put up if, if there's, like at Whitcomb and Rochester, if Rochester's a path, that has no stoplight. Is a stoplight going to be entertained to control traffic? Because that particular road's a half-mile road, so, and it's parking only on one side, so it's gained an enormous amount of traffic since the high school and since the factories at the other end on Stevenson, so, that's just
Sure.
one of those examples, but again, and then are there the bus stops where the pickups and drop-offs are gonna be? If there are shelters or anything that have to be put up, is that a cost that Smart picks up, or is that a cost the city's gonna have to pick up?
Us.
Okay. These are all things that you can take a look at later, but those are just some questions
great.
and some things, so, no, I'm good.
I love the public. If you could do, you're gonna hand something to our clerk, did you say?
I can.
That would be great.
These are, we talked about my entertaining probably more on cost basis
Yes.
because of my, my experience. And these are just some things that I put together to, there's enough over here.
Thanks.
But there's a,
Just hand it around. Thanks.
but anyway, those are just
Thank you.
some considerations for the burden, the cost burden that the city may have to pick up
Great, good
at
job.
Smart Home.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Anybody else? I guess not. Well then, until 2 weeks from tonight, we will see you again, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
As always, any questions, comments, we'll get them to Lucas, it's all good. I'll be in touch.
Thanks, Lucas. Sure.
We're gonna have to name one of the routes after him.
Oh, yes, the Lucas